On this episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show, we talk about improving ankle dorsiflexion mobility, especially in someone where it may be a little stubborn.
The Ask Mike Reinold Show. Helping people feel better, move better, and perform better.
Before we get to the podcast, I wanted to make sure you knew about my free online course on the Introduction to Performance Therapy and Training. If you want to learn how to get started optimizing and enhancing performance, this is the course for you. Head to mikereinold.com/performance to sign up today. Welcome back, everybody. The latest episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show. I'm here at Champion PT and Performance up in Boston, answering your questions. We're not the ones asking them. You're asking them. We're answering them. I'm here with Lenny Macrina, Kevin Coughlin, Dave Tilley, Dewesh Podell, all here from Champion PT and Performance. Again, I already said that. Len, just take it from here because I'm starting to just mumble. This is one of my worst episode intros of all time. Len, take it away. I need a break.
We're here at Champion PT. No, I'm just kidding. We have some great students, some amazing students. Like last week, I think this week we should go ladies first because we have Aaliyah Penner from Duke University with her classmate. Unusual, we have two from the same class. Grace Suggs from also Duke University. We have Dean Bonneau from George Washington University. And we have Sean Bean. That's right, Bean from University of Nevada at Las Vegas, UNLV, running Rebels, but not anymore running Rebels. I forget what they're called, but they changed their name.
What they change the name to?
I don't know, the Commodores or something like that. Who knows?
Really? Is that what it is, Sean? What's UNLV
right now?
Wait, what's that?
It's still Rebels right now. They logo.
That's right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what's a rebel? I don't know what a rebel is. I mean, Lenny's a rebel. He's a rehab rebel.
Yeah, rebel. Right.
Right? I think Grace is a rebel. Grace is a rebel for sure. A rebel for sure. All right. So Aaliyah, Grace, are you guys both in the same year? Are you in the same class or is one? You are. Okay, good. All right. Awesome. All right. Well, what do we got? We got Aaliyah today, right? Let's talk about it. So what do we got? Or is it Dean today? Who's got the question today?
I'll be reading today's. Yep.
Oh, sorry, Dean. I got excited. I was going in order by the video. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed.
I can be Aaliyah today. I'll be Aaliyah. We got Karen from New Zealand. She says, all the ankle mobility exercises I've ever seen and tried make virtually no difference to my somewhat limited ankle dorsiflexion. They help my right ankle, though. When I try the most common mobility exercises, I feel a restriction in my left hip, not my calf or ankle. But I've never heard or seen anything about how the hip is involved. What is the relationship between hip range of motion and ankle dorsiflexion?
All right, good question, Karen from New Zealand. I like that. I want to answer the question about, just improving ankle dorsiflexion mobility in general here too, because I'm not sure where it's going to go with the hip part. Right? I mean, if you're feeling your hip pinch when you're doing the dorsiflexion mobility drills, I'm not sure. Well, we got to answer Karen's question. I think the position you're putting yourself in, we may just need to adjust, right? So that's an interesting part. But why don't we start with that and knock that out real quick? But if she's feeling a pinch in her hip doing ankle dorsiflexion modes, I'm going to assume that's almost like in a half kneeling position, right? She's like doing like a bit of a lunge. So she's getting a little bit of like hip flexion, stuff like that. That's probably doing, Dewesh, if you're in the gym and a client's saying, I can't do any of my ankle dorsiflexion mobility drills without getting a pinch in my hip, what's the first thing you do?
Yeah, I just shorten up their half kneeling stance, make them posteriorly tilt a little bit more so that we're actually trying to bias the front ankle. And I see this happen in people that do it like standing in split stance and in half kneeling. I think both are fairly common in some people that are a little bit restricted in the hip or maybe even have some FAI type stuff. So, I just make them go back knee closer to their front heel and then go forward.
Right. So, I mean, you can switch them up from half kneeling to a standing position. I think standing would probably be a good way of doing it. That'd be interesting. I like that. I wonder too, if we're getting stuck like in the sagittal plane, right? And we think that we have to be in the sagittal plane, but theoretically, if we're working on ankle mobility, right? the only thing that probably matters is that like the tibia, like, you know, your shin and your foot are in the same plane together. It doesn't really matter if your hips in the sagittal plane, right? So maybe she can like widen her hips a little bit, right? And get her hip in a more comfortable position, and then make sure she's still doing that straight plane dorsiflexion mode, right? You know, those would be two potential things that I would come up with. And I wanted to hit that part of the question, Karen, because I like that part of the question, as it just shows is I wouldn't give up on any drill. I would try to find a way to modify it so that way you can work it around it a little bit. I think the first thing we would always do is let's find a position or maybe a variation of a drill that may be a little bit more comfortable, or something that you could succeed in a better position. And I think I would start with that first versus like, oh, these don't work, or I'm going to stop doing this because it hurts my hip. I'm not sure if it's that related. Now, let's dig into the real question, though. She's having trouble getting her ankle dorsiflexion mobility going, even though she's doing some of these drills, right? So I'm trying to guess if Dave wants to start with this one. I'm not 100% sure. Dave, what you want to start with this one here too? And then I'm sure Dave and Kevin like have seen this a ton with like people. Kevin does a lot of runners, and so, you know, I'm sure like some people are dealing with this often. What do you think, Dave?
I will quickly just say this. I deal with a lot of gymnasts and people who are impact athletes. And so I have seen many, many ankles that are stiff and don't move and stuff like that. I don't know why the timing of this episode works out. I'm reading a book about the foot, and there's a lot of discussion about talar dome shape and anatomy. And I can tell you that if you have very unique anatomy or a sport history that you've put a lot of, you know, mileage, no pun intended for Kevin, on your ankles, that it's very, very possible that the osseous shape of your talar dome and the way it interacts with the mortise has changed, and it's preventing a good gliding. So I made this mistake when I was in college as an athlete, and I know a lot of athletes who have continued to train through this. It's like they're just trying to do mobility work. They're trying to do like really aggressive kettlebell on their knee, overpressure, all this kind of stuff. If your bones themselves have maybe changed the shape and congruency because of past injuries or ankle sprains or stuff like that, this could be a true inherent limitation. So I would just caution you against continuing to really go hard on ankle mobility. Like maybe get an x-ray, maybe get some sort of a consult to make sure, because if you want to get it dealt with, that's cool. But if not, just accept it and maybe figure out training modifications or figure out other ways that you can work around. You know, there's nothing wrong with heel elevating your squats for the rest of your life and going to parallel and just being happy, especially if you have hip issues. So that's just, unless you're an elite gymnast, I wouldn't worry about it.
Right. And, you know, I mean, who even knows, right? Like what the dorsiflexion is. Sometimes people just work on something that they probably don't even need to work on, right? Like, you know, it's not the end of the world if you don't have symmetrical ankle dorsiflexion mobility. If your lack of mobility is impacting an activity you want to do, then yeah, that's a different conversation. But I like how Dave started that off. I was definitely thinking like, well, everybody's anatomically a little bit different, right? So maybe they have something there, but I do like that. I mean, you know, there's so many people, like, even if you're not an impact athlete with gymnastics or running or jumping type thing, if you're not an impact athlete, you know, even just recurring ankle sprains that, you know, you could have done as a youth, you know, just like spraining your ankle at recess, like over and over again over time, that could cause some adaptations that are limiting your dorsiflexion. So I like that. Kevin, anything you want to add to that from your experience with like your runners and stuff? Like, what do you, if somebody comes to you and says that, what's the first thing you're going to think of?
Yeah. So one thing is I'm curious how she's assessing her own dorsiflexion motion. I think a lot of times it maybe feels stiff, but she's maybe not objectively figuring out how limited it might be compared to her other side. So I think one thing I would do to start is maybe teach her like the half kneeling dorsiflexion test, like, kind of against the wall. And I think generally we want to see like almost a fist width between your foot and the wall, where you can glide your tibia forward and keep your heel flat. So I'd start out by figuring out how far away from the wall she might be with that type of test. And then I think this is something I learned from Dan, but you know, you see people all the time say X or Y mobility drill doesn't work for me, but there's no reassessment. So maybe she needs to work on, say, foam rolling her calf, and make sure she's doing it at the right dosage. So maybe 1 minute per day, 5 to 7 days per week, type thing, following it up with maybe a static stretch for the same type of duration. And then maybe we add in some like eccentric calf exercises. I find those three as a recipe work really well for improving mobility. But then you have to go back and recheck your mobility and see, am I making a change or not? And then I think another important thing is when she's doing that test, where she feels the limitation. If there's a limitation in the back of the calf, kind of like soleus, maybe it's more soft tissue related. But to Dave's point, if she's feeling like a pinchy pain or limitation in the front of her ankle at her talocrural joint, it's probably not something that you're going to improve on your own. And I'd caution people against like grabbing mobility bands and trying to torque their joint and improve, perform joint mobility stuff on their own, because it could be an anatomical restriction, could be a past injury. So I'd say if you're really feeling a limitation in the front of the ankle, that's when I'd seek out like a physical therapist and try to figure out why you're limited there and if there's something they could do to help you.
I like that. I mean, guidance through this process to try to figure this out is probably going to be best, right? We probably need to dig in a little bit deeper and figure out exactly what's going on, what the limitation is and why, and then kind of find that path for her. I think that's a real critical kind of key, right? What I like that you said there too, Kev, was that like, there's a chance she's maybe just putting maybe one or two ingredients into that recipe and not the correct ones, or maybe not even the correct dosage of them. That it's all about assessing and reassessing. That's one thing we do really good at Champion. I think that we've kind of like tried to systemize here is that we don't just like provide a treatment, right? What we do is we assess, we provide a treatment, then reassess to see what it did, right? Did it work? If it didn't work, let's dig back in and figure out what else we need to do. If it did work, great, move on to the next thing. Don't keep going at it just because in your head you thought I wanted to get to the 8-minute mark or something. That's irrelevant, but not to get off topic, right? But for me, I think it's about making sure she has the right dose. I think that's important. Dewey, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple things to add on to what Kevin said, because I think definitely figuring out what's causing the limitation, or maybe what are some reasons that we might see a limitation, are very important. Kevin obviously mentioned the soleus and then the joint in the front. The other two that I've noticed quite a bit, and one maybe a little bit, lost on a lot of people. I find that people that can't pronate well often don't get good dorsiflexion. Like if someone has a very, very stiff arch in their foot and they try to do all these dorsiflexion drills, but that foot's not actually pronating a little bit before that tibia glides forward, you're not really getting a whole lot of dorsiflexion. So people that, forget to assess what's happening at the foot, maybe running into a little bit of trouble as well. And then the other one too that I see quite a bit, and I know me and Dave have talked about this quite a bit, is actually the anterior tib. I think a lot of people that have like weakness in the anterior tib, or maybe have trouble controlling it, and for some people, I think it might be because of they're like frequent heel striking on foot contact when they're running and stuff. That can actually start to stiffen, but also probably, put down like a joint tension relationship where the anterior tib is just kind of locked down and like stuck in one place. So I've had quite a bit of success working on like eccentric lowering and maybe even just like direct anterior tib strengthening that'll all of a sudden improve ankle mobility. And then lastly, I think people also forget the whole, add load to the equation part of it. I think people do mobility. Well, if you're not actually spending time in, let's say, a deep squat or a deep lunge that actually requires this dorsiflexion, and then maybe even, higher velocity, higher load stuff like running and jumping, then you're not really going to get that mobility to stick because your body doesn't have a reason to keep it, right? So you got to give your body that reason by giving some sort of a loaded position to work on it over time.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I like the way, you get add up all those variables, right? And yeah. I mean, that's, again, with the assessment part gets like really deep, right? There may be something else that's limiting that ankle dorsiflexion, right? And you're absolutely right. Foot mechanics play a big part in that as well. So, right. So, I think the big key is, right, we need to guide her. We need to dig in a little bit deeper, right? And this is one of the things where sometimes like early career professionals in PT world and the fitness world, maybe they get like a little frustrated sometimes that they're not seeing immediate results. But we always say like, look, do your eval, do your assessment process, come up with an intelligent, program to see what's working, but then reassess to see if it's not working. If it's not, don't feel bad, take a step back, look a little deeper, I think that's the key, is like sometimes, like, the majority of people will get better with some of the basics, but sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper with some people, right? And Karen's one of those people we need to dig a little deeper with. So like a really good, example of, it's okay to give it, a good solid shot and maybe not get the outcomes that you're expecting right away, but just know that, okay, yeah, all right, it's time to dig a little deeper because she's not responding the way I thought she would. And then that's where you start to like kind of chase that out a little bit. And I think that's an appropriate process that we all go through, even us experienced clinicians. So I kind of keep that in mind too, for some of those people. I know it seems like it's, well, you just do this drill. I saw this on Instagram. It should work, right? And then it doesn't. And you see that on so many people. It can get frustrating at times. So awesome. Karen, hope that helps. Thanks for the question. I really appreciate that. If you have another question, head to mikereinold.com, click on that podcast link and fill out the form to ask your own question. And be sure to head to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, rate, review, subscribe so you can catch our next episode. And we will see you in the future.